The museum visitors loved Harold's tours because he made history come alive with details you couldn't find in any guidebook. He knew which artifacts were authentic, which were reproductions, and stories about how they had been acquired that seemed too specific to be general knowledge. What they didn't realize was that their charming tour guide had learned these details from textbooks. He had learned them from classified files during 30 years of analyzing global intelligence operations. Welcome to the true human tales. Before we begin this fascinating story of hidden expertise and unexpected revelation, tell me in the comments which city you are watching from today, and if you believe stories about remarkable people living quietly among us deserve to be shared. Hit that subscribe button. These voices need to be heard. The Metropolitan Museum of Ancient Civilizations stood in the heart of downtown, welcoming thousands seeking connection to humanity's distant past. Inside, carefully curated collections told stories spanning millennia: Egyptian sarcophagi, Roman sculptures, Byzantine manuscripts from civilizations whose names were known only to scholars. Harold Patterson had been giving tours at the museum for 15 years, 2 months and 11 days. To visitors, he was simply a volunteer guide who donated time to share knowledge with curious tourists, school groups, and history enthusiasts wandering the halls. He arrived every Tuesday and Thursday at 9:45 a.m. carrying the same worn leather satchel and comfortable walking shoes. He moved through galleries with easy familiarity, having memorized every display case and story worth telling. Visitors found him wonderfully knowledgeable. Harold made ancient history feel immediate and relevant, connecting modern audiences to peoples separated by thousands of years. He explained complex contexts in simple terms, answered unexpected questions with surprising detail, and made strangers care about pottery shards and broken statues. What none of them knew was that Harold had spent 30 years as a CIA analyst specializing in international art trafficking, cultural artifact smuggling, and organized crime intersecting with academic institutions. The same attention to detail that made him engaging had once been invaluable in operations where understanding provenance and authentication could prevent international incidents. His tour routes were carefully constructed narratives that avoided discussing how certain artifacts had been acquired through questionable means or why he could identify forgeries that had fooled museum authentication for years. Harold had perfected 15 years of being a harmless retiree who loved history, because harmless retirees could share passion for ancient cultures without uncomfortable questions about their knowledge of the international art world's dark side. That strategy worked perfectly until being harmless was no longer sufficient. Thursday morning began like hundreds of others. Harold's 10 a.m. tour group consisted of 12 visitors, a retired couple from Ohio college students, a German businessman named Klaus, and a family with teenagers more interested in phones than ancient civilizations. Welcome to our ancient Mediterranean collection. Harold began with warm enthusiasm. Today we will explore how these artifacts tell stories of human innovation, trade, and cultural exchange across 3,000 years. The group gathered around Greek pottery from the 5th century BCE. Harold launched into practice presentation about ceramic techniques, mythological imagery, and symposium culture in ancient Athens. This red figure amphora shows Achilles and Ajax playing dice during the Trojan War. We can trace its provenance to a specific Athens workshop, and archaeological evidence suggests it was found in an Etruscan tomb, showing how Greek pottery became luxury trade goods throughout the Mediterranean. Klaus leaned forward with unusual attention. How can you be so certain about provenance? Many pieces from this period have uncertain origins. Harold paused briefly, a hesitation only someone trained to notice would catch. The question was reasonable, but something about how it was asked triggered dormant instincts. The museum's acquisition records are quite detailed, Harold replied pleasantly, with extensive documentation from archaeological excavation and stylistic analysis matching other workshop pieces. What Harold didn't mention was knowing the real provenance from classified files, documenting how this amphora had been smuggled from Italy in 1987, sold through dealers specializing in laundered artifacts, and acquired through donations, obscuring its questionable journey. The tour continued through Roman galleries, where Harold shared stories about imperial portraiture and daily life. His explanations were rich with details, bringing marble faces to life which emperors were assassinated, how statues were discovered, why inscriptions were significant. Klaus continued asking questions slightly too informed for casual tourists. Questions about acquisition dates, export licenses, authentication processes that made Harold's analytical instincts work over time. When they reached Byzantine galleries, Harold's peaceful retirement began showing strain. In the Byzantine section, Harold's group gathered around illuminated manuscripts, religious icons, and precious metalwork from the Eastern Roman Empire. This illuminated Gospel of St. Mark dates from 980 CE, created in Constantinople's monastery of Studios. The quality and expense suggest commissioning by someone wealthy, probably a salvation donation. Klaus moved closer, studying the manuscript with focused attention that fired Harold's warning signals. The provenance documentation must be complex. Klaus observed Byzantine manuscripts from this period often have complicated histories after Constantinople's fall. Harold knew Klaus was just an educated tourist. The comment was too specific about authentication challenges Byzantine artifacts presented, demonstrating awareness of systematic looting and trafficking ongoing for centuries. Harold continued prepared remarks about medieval book production, but his mind worked on multiple levels. Klaus' accent was quite right for German businessman. His questions showed expertise beyond casual interest. His positioning suggested more interest in Harold than artifacts. The monastery was destroyed during the Fourth Crusade in 1204, making manuscripts like this extremely rare survivors. Yes, Klaus replied, very few authentic Studios pieces remain in circulation. Most market appearances are later copies or outright forgeries. Harold's blood pressure spiked. Klaus had just demonstrated black market knowledge no legitimate businessman would possess unless involved in the trade. The rest of the group remained oblivious to developing tension. College students took notes. The family tried engaging teenagers. Retired couple asked innocent questions about medieval Christianity. But Harold Patterson, former CIA analyst with 3 decades of international art crime experience, recognized his carefully constructed retirement had collided with his old professional world. When the tour ended, most dispersed toward cafe or gift shop. Klaus lingered, approaching Harold with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Thank you for such informative tour. I am particularly interested in authentication processes for uncertain provenance pieces. Perhaps you could recommend additional reading. Harold looked at someone clearly not who he claimed asking questions, suggesting involvement in activities Harold had spent 3 decades investigating. For 15 years, he had successfully hidden his identity. For 15 years, he had been just another retired volunteer sharing history love. But some encounters don't allow for separation. I think we should continue this conversation somewhere more private, Harold said quietly. Harold led Klaus to a small office behind the information desk. He closed the door and faced the man who had shattered 15 years of anonymity. Which agency are you with, and what do you want? Harold asked, abandoning his tour guide demeanor. Klaus smiled genuinely. Interpol Cultural Property. Crime Unit. I want Harold Patterson, former CIA analyst specializing in international art trafficking, to help with a case threatening several major museums, including this one. Harold sat heavily. How did you find me? Your tours. Someone with your detailed knowledge about provenance, authentication challenges, trafficking patterns does develop that expertise from museum training. It took 2 years to verify identity, but your explanations included details only someone with classified file access would know. I have been retired 15 years. Whatever case you are working, I am not involved. Klaus opened his briefcase, pulling out photographs and documents. 3 months ago, we discovered sophisticated forgery operation targeting major museums worldwide. They are creating fake artifacts and fake provenance documentation, fake excavation records, fake acquisition histories. They have placed forgeries in 12 museums across Europe and North America. Harold glanced at the photographs. High-quality forgeries with fabricated documentation that would fool most authentication processes. Impressive work, But I don't see how it involves me, because they are using your old case files to select targets. Somehow they have accessed classified CIA records, documenting museums with questionable acquisitions. They are using that information to place forgeries in institutions that can't challenge authenticity, without revealing problematic provenance. Harold stared at documents, his mind processing implications. If someone accessed his old files, they would know about dozens of vulnerable museums with questionably acquired artifacts. Who else knows about this? Very few museums don't even know they are targeted. We are trying to identify and remove forgeries before word damages the entire international museum community. Harold looked at Klaus, then at photographs representing threats to institutions he had grown to respect during retirement. What do you need? Klaus leaned forward. Help us identify which pieces here are authentic versus potential forgeries. Your knowledge of real provenance behind questionable acquisitions is the only way to distinguish between legitimate artifacts with complicated histories and sophisticated fakes with fabricated documentation. Harold was quiet, looking around the office that had become home during 15 peaceful years. Through the window, he saw visitors moving through galleries, children learning about civilizations, families sharing cultural experiences. If I help, my cover here is blown, I can continue being just a harmless retiree who loves history. No, but you can help preserve integrity of institutions, introducing millions to human cultural heritage. You can protect museums from unknowing complicity in cultural crimes. Harold looked at sophisticated forgeries designed to exploit vulnerabilities he had documented decades earlier. His peaceful retirement was over, but perhaps his real work had just begun again. All right, let's examine some artifacts. What followed was unlike any museum tour Harold had given. Moving through galleries with Klaus, he viewed familiar artifacts through analytical lens abandoned 15 years earlier. Every piece required evaluation for authenticity, provenance, accuracy, and vulnerability to the fraud operation. This Egyptian canopic jar has always bothered me, Harold said in the ancient Egypt gallery. Inscription style is correct for 18th dynasty, but limestone composition doesn't match known period quarries. Klaus took notes as Harold pointed out inconsistencies tour groups never heard, details requiring expertise in geology, linguistics, art history, and criminal methodology. Documentation shows 1962 acquisition from Swiss private collector, but I remember files about Kamwaset tomb artifacts sold through Swiss dealers during that exact period. They spent 3 hours moving through collections Harold had discussed hundreds of times with innocent tourists, now sharing knowledge from classified intelligence files and decades of cultural crime investigation experience. At least 6 pieces I can identify with confidence as potential forgeries. Harold concluded, maybe more requiring laboratory analysis. But the bigger problem is whoever is behind this has access to impossible to obtain information. Klaus nodded grimly. That's what we fear. This isn't just art fraud, it's a security breach threatening cultural institutions worldwide. Harold realized his quiet retirement had taught him something valuable about institutions he had protected from a distance during his CIA career. The museum was just an artifact repository. It was where human stories were preserved and shared, where people connected with heritage, where knowledge was democratically accessible rather than classified. I will help with the investigation, but I have conditions. Harold told Klaus. What conditions? Museum staff and tour groups don't need to know my background unless absolutely necessary. This is a place of learning and cultural appreciation, not intelligence operations. I want to protect that environment. Klaus agreed, and they developed plans to discreetly investigate suspected forgeries while maintaining normal museum operations. Over following weeks, Harold lived a complex double life. By day, he continued giving tours to unsuspecting visitors sharing passion for ancient history. During off hours, he worked with Klaus and investigators to identify forgeries, trace origins, and build cases against criminals targeting cultural institutions. The investigation uncovered a sophisticated international network systematically defrauding museums while exploiting vulnerabilities around questionable acquisitions. Harold's knowledge proved essential in distinguishing between authentic artifacts with complicated histories and sophisticated forgeries designed to exploit those complications. Harold continued giving tours at the Metropolitan Museum, but everything about how he understood his role changed after the investigation. He still arrived every Tuesday and Thursday at 9:45 a.m., still shared enthusiasm for ancient civilizations, but now he did so knowing that protecting cultural heritage required both preserving artifacts and sharing them with people who could appreciate their significance. Klaus returned to Interpol but maintained contact for consultation on cultural property crimes. Harold's unique combination of intelligence expertise and genuine appreciation for cultural institutions made him invaluable for protecting museums worldwide. "You taught us something important," Klaus told Harold months later. "The best way to protect cultural heritage is just investigating crimes against it. It's helping people understand why these artifacts matter." Harold's tour groups never knew their guide had spent 3 decades in intelligence work, but they noticed his tours seemed more passionate and detailed over time. He spoke about preserving cultural heritage museums, responsibility to protect and make artifacts accessible, and connections between understanding the past and building better futures. "Harold teaches us that history is just what happened," one regular visitor commented. "These artifacts represent the best of human creativity, and protecting them protects something essential about who we are." Harold had spent 30 years protecting cultural heritage from shadows, then 15 years sharing it in sunlight. Both activities were part of the same mission, ensuring human cultural achievement could be preserved, studied, and appreciated by people who understood its value. He had traded classified files for tour notes, but never stopped serving the cause of protecting humanity's shared heritage. He had just found a more public way to do it. The Day of Klaus. Visit Harold learned that heroes don't always work in secret. Sometimes they work in museums, sharing knowledge with anyone curious enough to listen, protecting cultural treasures by helping people understand why those treasures matter. And sometimes when everything goes wrong, those quiet educators turn out to be exactly the experts the world needed all along. At the True Human Tales, we believe that remarkable people often choose to share their expertise in unexpected ways, not because they have abandoned important work, but because they have found new ways to serve the same essential mission. Have you ever discovered that someone you thought was just a volunteer or educator was actually an expert with extraordinary background? Share their story in the comments below. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel. We are here to remind you that people teaching, guiding, and sharing knowledge around us every day often have remarkable stories and invaluable expertise that deserves recognition. Thank you for watching, and we will see you in the next story.